So we always were very clear that sometimes there would be some very much unforeseen consequences when it came to Brexit, especially for the wildly unforeseen ones sometimes that we would probably see and probably have yet to really occur. And this is one such case because I had no idea that Brexit would play such a big key thing in the sport of pigeon racing, aka the pigeon fanciers. I don't know what they call themselves. They have like a cutesy name like the train spotters or something like that. I don't know, but ultimately, I think when we come to write the ultimate history of the big Brexit failures and how big a failure it was, this is almost certainly going to be a case of, and certainly on the list of the bizarre and strange things that Brexit had a consequence on that not many people either knew about or even foresaw being really too much of a problem. And to be honest, someone's going to ask, well, how many pigeon fanciers voted for Brexit? I, to be honest, couldn't tell you. I don't know. I don't know if that information is out there. I don't know. But needless to say, this is quite an interesting thing. But I am sure there will be other sports as well. In fact, I think this is also going to affect horse racing as well in a very similar way. So we'll keep an eye open for that as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if it does as well. So, before we do get into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, as well as one donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all the people for supporting the channel that way. So, on with today's article. This comes from the New European with the title of Stop the Pigeon, How Brexit Flawed the Fanciers. For more than 120 years, Britain's pigeon fanciers have raced their birds across long distances in the sport's most prestigious events across the Channel. Right up to the pandemic, the purpose-built lorries could arrive in Calais ahead of the load's liberation, the sport's parlance for its release, on French soil on Saturday morning, with the birds then racing to get home. Britain's relatively small size means that the pigeon fancier in, say, Sheffield would otherwise very much struggle to take part in long-distance races. Even the Scottish Highlands in the south coast could not provide the testing distances provided by crossing the Channel. But all that came to a very much an effective stop for the estimated over 30,000 people in Britain involved in the sport just last year. The reason, predictably, is Brexit. In April of 2021, the new EU animal health laws came into force on the continent, which, in a bid to avoid the importation of diseases introduced by onerous new restrictions on taking birds into the bloc from third countries, that is, countries outside the EU, like Britain and Northern Ireland, of course, is a slightly separate case. We've been taking pigeons into France more than any other European country for that purpose of racing for about 120 years now, says Ian Evans, the CEO of the Royal Pigeon Racing Association, told the New European. It's a traditional thing, especially with people who perhaps live from the Midlands up in the north of the country. For any kind of distance racing, your only option was to really go into France. Prior to last year, he said, pretty much no paperwork was involved. When we left the European Union, obviously, we became treated differently because then we were a third country, said Evans. But even at the point of time that we'd left, we were still being able to move some of the birds into France and other member states without any real paperwork because of under the animal health regulations were in place at the time. The pigeons from the third countries were exempt from any kind of animal health requirements, which was in recognition of their lower threat to any kind to spread disease. And of course, on April the 21st last year, these new regulations came into force. For the third countries, that basically means that pigeons would have to be quarantined in the country that they came from. and quarantine in the country of destination. Each pigeon would have to have a signed veterinary health certificate and get that health certificate that they've had the negative from laboratory test for avian influenza and Newcastle disease, a highly contagious disease in birds, within at least 14 days of each movement. Well, I mean, they just made racing impossible because you can't quarantine birds. They've got to be fit. You can't keep locking them up for any period of times. It's a very onerous requirement of the health certificate, just meant that racing was virtually impossible. The industry has been lobbying both the Departments for Environment of Rural Affairs, DEFRA, and the EU directly, seeking to try and find a compromise by which both the veterinary certificate remains, but also covers the convoy, not individual birds, but both the quarantine and laboratory tests also to be scrapped. To be fair, the EU, they did take it on board and recognized that perhaps this was a bit over the top, really, because the scientific proof out there, which includes European research, does suggest that pigeons' threat of spreading avian influenza is very, very small, if any at all, said Evans. Pigeons do get Newcastle disease, which is predominantly found in poultry, but since the 80s, in order to take part in any pigeon race, all birds have had to be vaccinated at least for 14 to 21 days in advance. The issue is unfortunate at a time when the sport is trying to arrest a decline in its numbers. Although a report from more than 5 years ago estimated that it was worth at least £110 million to the economy. I didn't know that, but that's news to me. And now is probably a lot more, according to Evans. The RAP now has at least 18,000 members compared to its 60,000 in the 1980s, and has been running a campaign to take the sport into schools. 6 now have their very own lofts. DEFRA was also working very hard behind the scenes, he says. The government publicly merely states the fact that the containments must meet the EU's import requirements and to be accompanied by an appropriate health export certificate. Obviously, it comes lower on their list of priorities, but nevertheless, they have been working on our behalf to try and get this resolved, said Evans. He acknowledges that ultimately the issue is Brexit. Ultimately, yeah, we'd be subject to different regulations if the UK was still in the EU, he said. Although at the time, back on April the 21st last year, they did change the regulations for moving captive birds between member states as well. But of course, those member states being in the club, we were able to get things changed quite quickly. And they've got changes to legislation now. So they've continued to move pigeons behind member states for racing purposes with no problems at all. The problem for us, obviously, is not being in the club, I suppose. So there you have it. Who knew? Who knew Brexit would be such a problem for pigeon racers in the UK? I had no idea. I didn't realize again it was still that prevalent, let alone being again according to that according to that estimate being worth what is it 110 million pounds to the UK economy. Who knew? Who knew such a thing? But anyway, as they say, every day is a school day. You learn pretty lots sometimes. So yeah, you learn quite a lot sometimes. So yeah, I would not be surprised to see that this is probably having other effects on lots of other animal sports as well. So yeah, horse racing, I wouldn't be surprised if it's having an effect on that. Maybe dog shows as well. All kinds of different events that involve moving animals across the channel are probably going to be heavily, heavily affected. Doesn't surprise me, really doesn't surprise me, but this is, hey, this is what the case happened here. And ultimately, this is again sort of a bizarre case, but it is an example of, we did Brexit, and this was indeed one of the probably foreseen and probably unforeseen consequences of it. And what's the solution to this? Well, I said many, many times, just rejoin the European Union single market. It solves so many of our problems literally overnight. But of course, then we don't have a say in many of these regulations. So obviously, the answer to that is to then just fully rejoin the EU. Again, it'll take some time ultimately, but we are seeing on a quite a as it goes on, people are starting to realize, hold on, Brexit wasn't the big benefit it was sold us to be and isn't really turning out that way. In fact, it's damaging us opportunity, and especially because of the recovery that we are going to see. We are going to see the UK recover a whole lot slower, I think, compared to other European countries. In fact, we're already seeing that now. So, as always, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a motivation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all